Hello everyone, my name is Renee and I am a Mount Allison University alumna from the class of 2017, and I'm speaking to you today on behalf of the University Archives. Today's presentation will hopefully be a fun way to introduce you to a bit of Mount Allison history, folklore, and the environment that you will be calling home for the immediate future. It will provide a brief overview of what the Allisonian experience is all about and how that has changed and evolved over time. We hope that you enjoy the presentation, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. You can find us on the Mount Allison Library website, or you can email us directly at archives@mta.ca. Let's start at the beginning. The founder and benefactor of the Mount Allison institutions was Charles Frederick Allison. He was born in the Annapolis Valley in Nova Scotia, but he came to Sackville at the age of 21 to work with a family relative who lived in what is now Cranewood. Allison became a merchant, and his main business operation was then called Crane's Corner. It was at the present-day intersection of Main, Bridge, and York Streets. Allison married Milka Trueman, a relative of a future university president, and the couple had one daughter named Mary. They lived on the site now occupied by Convocation Hall, and there's a memorial plaque in the lozenge in front of Convocation Hall today, so if you venture out that way when you start exploring campus, keep an eye out for it. Charles Frederick Allison began work on establishing an institution of higher learning in 1839. His idea and financial support ultimately spawned three institutions. First, the Academy, which was founded in 1843 and served as a school for boys. Within a few years of the founding of the Male Academy, there were calls for a female branch to be opened. Again, Charles Frederick Allison agreed to sponsor this work, and the Ladies' College opened a decade later. The belief behind this idea was that a mother would be better able to teach her children and bring them up in the teachings of the Methodist Church if she herself was educated. After Allison's death in 1858, Mount Allison University was founded in 1862, and a commercial college was added to the Boys' Academy. All of the other institutions closed in the mid-20th century, and now only the university remains. It will be graduating its 159th class in 2021. True or false? Was the university founded because of spoons? The answer is true. As the story goes, Charles Frederick Allison's grandfather, Joseph Allison, immigrated to Canada because of a dinner with a government tax collector. Wanting to impress the man, the family had set the table with their one valuable possession, silver spoons. Seeing the spoons, the tax collector told the Allison family that if they could afford such a luxury item, they could afford to pay more taxes. So the family left Ireland. It is believed that the spoons were a wedding present from Joseph Allison to his wife, Alice Caldwell. If you look closely on the handle of the spoon, you can see the initials J.A. and another A on top. The same spoons can be seen on display in the case on the main floor of the Pickard Bell Library, so you can go confirm the legend on your own. In notes that have survived in the Argosy student newspaper, it appears that the Mount Allison colors, garnet and gold, were finally decided upon in 1886. Until the 1970s, many classes also had their own colors. There are examples in the archives of the various class colors on pennants, but later there were stamps that had to be worn by freshmen for the first few weeks of class in the fall semester to identify them as members of the incoming class. Another long-standing tradition were the class yells. This tradition really comes alive during reunion weekend each year. The classes are invited to stand and offer their year's yell, and it creates a rather rowdy environment sometimes. Fun fact, in 1903, Emma Sophia Baker became the first woman to receive a PhD from a Canadian university. She earned a PhD in psychology from the University of Toronto and taught French and biblical history at Mount Allison between 1901 and 1913. She succeeded Mary Mellish Archibald as preceptress of the Ladies' College. Her achievement raised the number of professors with doctorates to 2 at the Ladies' College, but it would be another 8 years before the same could be said about the university. The first university graduates were from the class of 1863 and included Josiah Wood, who you can see here seated left, and Reverend Howard Spragg. Back in 1863, when you left a place of higher learning, you had 2 main career choices. You could either become a clergy or a lawyer. As the story goes, Wood and Sprague could not decide what they wanted to do, so they settled it by spitting on a wood chip and tossing it in the air. I guess there were no coins available. The way the wood chip landed determined who would go where. Sprague became the minister and ultimately returned to Mount A to teach theology and religion. Wood became a lawyer, politician, and New Brunswick lieutenant governor. For many years, he and his wife resided in Cranewood on Main Street, which was turned into an eatery and bakery in 2013. And their food is delicious, so I would recommend that you pay them a visit. Many people assume that the main administration building on campus, Centennial Hall, was built to mark a significant Mount Allison anniversary. In fact, it was built to honor the arrival of Wesleyan Methodism in this part of the world. As you may know, the university was founded based on the tenets of this religion. The current Centennial Hall building looks quite different than the original, which was destroyed in 1933 when an arsonist destroyed 3 buildings on the Mount Allison campus. It was quite a harrowing winter, and security guards patrolled the remaining buildings 24 hours a day until the end of the semester. Another recognizable site on campus is the pond. The pond forms part of the property that formerly belonged to founder Charles Frederick Allison. It was purchased in 1885 following the death of the founder's wife, Milka. In 1901, John Hammond, who was at the time head of the Fine Arts Department, created drawings and a design for the pond, and the site was later excavated and filled with water. Initially, there was a nozzle that sprayed water, but by 1905, plans were made to install a proper fountain. Much of the initial landscaping was financially supported by Josiah Wood, member of the first university class, and his wife Flora Sophia Trueman. The pond lent its name to the new student pub after the Wallace McCain Center opened in 2008, so make sure that you don't confuse the two. True or false? Does the pond have other names? This is true. The pond has been formerly known as the Ladies' College Pond, the Lily Pond, and the Swan Pond, which was its name when I was in attendance because it was home to 2 beautiful swans named Herbert and Muriel. They were named after alumni Herbert Lench Pottle and his wife Muriel Ethel Morin, who had a great love for Mount Allison and wanted to beautify the campus, so they supported and maintained a pair of swans for a number of years. Now we come to the part of the presentation that should serve as a warning of what not to do on campus. A wonderful prank example from the 1940s was exacted against the Dean of Women, Dr. Ann Dixon, who one morning stepped out of her apartment at the Ladies' College to find that her car had disappeared. It did not take long for her to discover its whereabouts, for it was all too evident from these photographs that her car was high and dry on the little island in the pond. Although the pond was fairly shallow, it was still too deep to drive the car through. The only solution, after a few days, was for the facilities staff to build a bridge to rescue the vehicle. It took the custodians and janitors quite a while to figure out how to build a bridge to get the car off the island. The pranksters who placed it there were able to take beams from the old rink that was being torn down at the time to jimmy-rig a bridge that allowed the cars to be put in neutral and pushed over there. They did it under the cover of darkness during a single night. On the other hand, it took the men from facilities about 3 days to get the cars off once an appropriate design could be determined for the bridge. Another important first for Mount Allison is Grace Annie Lockhart, who became the first woman in the British Empire to earn a bachelor's degree. Lockhart came from a family of daughters, and though all 3 of her older sisters attended Mount Allison, Grace was the only one to complete her studies. She entered the Ladies' College in 1871 and graduated with a Mistress of Liberal Arts in 1874. The following year, she continued her studies at the university and was awarded her BA in 1875. She went on to marry one of her classmates, the Reverend John Laird Dawson. A cafe in the Wallace McCain Student Center is named after Grace Annie Lockhart as a tribute to this important achievement for women. Bigelow House was also named after an important figure. Professor Harold Bigelow earned a BA with honors in science from Mount Allison University. He went on to pursue organic chemistry and later earned an MA and a PhD from Harvard. He taught at Mount Allison between 1911 and 1914 and Brown University in 1914-1915. He returned to Mount Allison in the fall of 1915 and was named head of the chemistry department. He held that position until his retirement in 1946. The residence named in his honor was originally for men only and was part of a period of significant expansion on campus in the late 1950s and early 1960s. This new campus construction also included residences which honor another favorite professor, Sidney Walker Hunton, and the nephews of Canada's 11th Prime Minister, R.B. Bennett, who were killed during the Second World War. These residences were also for men only and replaced two temporary buildings on campus built for veterans who returned from overseas service immediately after the war. Normandy Field, near the Waterfall Park, still bears the name of the temporary residence that once sat adjacent to the playing field. In more recent history, Mount Allison has made efforts towards reconciliation with Indigenous communities. In response to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, which was constituted between 2008 and 2015, the Mount Allison community began work of its own to start down the path to reconciliation. In 2015, the university hired its first Indigenous Affairs coordinator, Doreen Richard, from the class of 1996, and the serious work of finding a new way began. With her assistance, the Mi'kmaq flag was raised that year, and the President's Speaker Series focused on Indigenous action and Indigenous knowing in succeeding years. We held our first powwow in 2018 and look forward to further changes during your time with us. True or false? The residences on Salem spell oil. To the left of this image, you can see that the residences going up the hill beside Salem Street appear to spell oil. For many years, a myth circulated that the residences were arranged this way to pay tribute to the Irving Corporation, which is one of New Brunswick's largest businesses. Many students believe that the residences were built with funds from Irving, but that is definitely not the case. It's just a weird coincidence. Here's another prank idea for you. It looks like Spider-Man attended Mount Allison in the early 1980s. He decided he wanted to demonstrate where the true seat of higher learning should be. He scaled the outside of the chapel and made his way up the pole to perch the seat high above the campus. It was definitely hard to miss. He clearly didn't have any fear of heights to be able to undertake this prank. The funniest part of this prank is that the bucket you see in this photograph didn't quite reach to where the seat had been installed, so Spider-Man had to be coaxed to come out from hiding and remove the chair in the same way that he had installed it. He was given immunity to do this. Mount Allison's first chancellor was Ralph Pickard Bell, a graduate from the class of 1907. Bell was the grandson of the first president of Mount Allison University. However, he was more a man of action than an academic. His career after university included being on the Halifax Relief Commission following the 1917 explosion, the Canadian lead on aircraft production during the Second World War, and consolidating small fish companies into National Sea Products, which continues to produce Highliner brand products to this day. Ralph married Marjorie Young Smith, whose name you might recognize from the Convocation Hall and the Music Conservatory. Marjorie inherited a fortune that began with the Smith family of nearby Dorchester, New Brunswick. When she died in 1964, she left a bequest to Mount Allison that exceeded $8 million at the time. The Ralph Pickard Bell Library was named after our first chancellor and turns 50 this year. It is the only octagonal building on campus, and its roof is also the site of the CHMA radio and cell phone emitting towers. Interestingly, Ralph Bell's name appears only on the east side of the building, on which there is no main entrance. The archivist has long wondered if Ralph's name, which faces east towards his native Nova Scotia, is not also looking at his wife's Marjorie's name on Convocation Hall, which itself looks west to her native New Brunswick. That's a small piece of Mount Allison romance for you. The images on this slide were taken in the former Trueman House residence, which has been repurposed as the Wallace McCain Center. One of the tricks that was regularly played on students was giving them a fully clothed birthday shower. As a result, many men kept their birth dates secret. The floors in Trueman House were divided into east, center, and west, and they frequently got into fights, including water fights, like the ones you see here from the late 1960s. As you can see from these images, the history of water fights goes back a very long way. These images are from circa 1941 and show the men in the aftermath of one such event. One of the most intriguing variations on this theme relates to an occasion where a group of men on the floor of the barn residence decided that they wanted to play a game of hockey. To make things more realistic, they covered the hallway with white washing powder, to make it look like ice and then added blue lines and a red center line to top it off. Unfortunately, a prankster decided to make it more fun by adding water to create a slippery, sudsy mess. The Dean of Men at the time, Don McLaughlin, known as the Chin, arranged a significant punishment and ensured that the men in the residence cleaned up what was left of their hockey game. Walking around Sackville, you will likely stumble upon things that make you wonder what it's all about. One such thing is the bronze broom and dustpan that you see on the north side of Bridge Street near the main intersection in town. It's an unusual choice, but it honors one of Sackville's unique characters of days gone by. If you had been in Sackville 20 years ago, you would have likely seen Harold cleaning the sidewalk and gutters of the area around the main intersection. He wasn't particularly talkative, but he was there every morning, rain or shine. Harold was a survivor of the Halifax explosion who had been adopted by a Sackville family, worked as a custodian at Mount Allison, and despite his rumored gruffness, was always out tidying his hometown. After his death, a group of citizens banded together to memorialize him. It was a fitting tribute to one of Sackville's unsung heroes. The Owens Art Gallery, the first university art gallery in Canada, was initially established in St. John, New Brunswick, through the generosity of John Owen. Unfortunately, the school and gallery didn't fare too well in that location, and ultimately it was decided that the art collection would be transferred to Mount Allison. The building opened in 1895 and this year celebrates its 125th anniversary. The collection is a rare treasure and is well worth a visit for any who are interested in art. The long-standing tradition of teaching fine arts at Mount Allison has resulted in a number of very impressive painters. Most notable amongst these Allisonians is Alex Colville from the class of 1942. He served as a wartime artist following graduation, taught here until 1961, and became Canada's preeminent magic realist painter. Colville also influenced another generation of artists that includes Christopher Pratt and Tom Forstall, amongst others. His most famous female student was Mary Pratt, whose use of color and light is simply remarkable. She has generously donated her papers to the Mount Allison archives, and they are currently being processed for future researchers. This building served as the Colville family home between 1949 and 1973, and is also now part of the Owens Art Gallery. It is usually open during the summer and on special occasions to allow interested visitors to get a glimpse into Colville's work, where he lived, and how his art has been used around the world. The most fascinating part of the house is the room used to house the contents of his studio. Everything was left to Mount Allison following his death and now forms a central part of the tour of the building. True or false, most university residences relate to one donor's family's ancestry. The answer is true. Many Allisonians are unaware that the majority of the residence buildings on campus do not relate to people who attended the university. Windsor Hall, which opened in 1963, was the first of many buildings that were financially assisted or built through the efforts of Sidney A. Windsor. After leaving Sackville, he worked near Bathurst, New Brunswick, and in Quebec, setting up the Windsor Canning Company Limited. The proceeds of his estate formed the Windsor Foundation, which continues to support Mount Allison to this day, including the construction of the following residences: Campbell, Edwards, Harper, Jennings, Thornton. All the names are surnames associated with Sidney Windsor's ancestry. Frank Parker Day was another individual connected to the Windsor family through marriage. His name doesn't appear on a building at Mount A, but he is significant because he was our first Rhodes Scholar, dating back to 1905. He married Mabel Killam of Yarmouth, Nova Scotia. She was a well-known artist and part of an important Nova Scotia family whose name appears on the main library at Dalhousie University and the Children's Hospital in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Parker Day was a scholar athlete and won the heavyweight boxing and rowing championships while at Oxford. He went on to become the 11th president of Union College in New York, and more recently his book Rockbound won the 4th installment of Canada Reads on CBC. These images come to us from a member of the class of 1969. They demonstrate the fine art of removing door hinges and swapping out room contents. This was a notorious prank that was played by those who left their rooms unattended or unguarded in the former residence. These photos were taken in Trueman House, now the Wallace McCain Student Center. True or false? Does Mount Allison have a ghost? Well, maybe. One of Mount Allison's most notorious figures is a woman named Ethel Peake, pictured here as Brunhilde for an opera. She was an instructor of voice at the Old Music Conservatory and was renowned for her jewelry. She loved beads. According to Allisonian lore, after she died, students would hear the clanging of what sounded like the beads from her necklace. One explanation that was put forth was that the janitor had a ring with a lot of keys on it. Her apartment used to be in Hart Hall, so if you hear what appears to be something clanging, it might be Ethel coming to visit. As I just mentioned, Ethel Peake lived in Hart Hall. Today, it is the only remaining structure from the former Ladies' College. It was opened in 1910 through the generosity of Jairus Hart of Halifax, Nova Scotia. He was a president of the Bank of Nova Scotia and a director of the Halifax School for the Blind. He left a large estate that partially funded the construction of the building which bears his name. The Hart family has long been associated with the Mount Allison institutions. A number of Harts went on to serve as missionaries in Asia, and Sarah Hart taught applied arts at the Owens Art Gallery. One of the most interesting fun facts is that there used to be a swimming pool in the basement of Hart Hall. This picture gives you an idea of what it looked like. In a case of reverse gender discrimination, the men were not allowed to use this pool. In more recent times, this area served as part of the Department of Fine Arts before it moved into the current location in the Purdy Crawford Center. Mount A has long been noted for its very elaborate junior proms. The class of 1957 included decorations and designs by Christopher and Mary Pratt that turned the old gymnasium into a Scottish castle to complement the Brigadoon theme. Now, everyone knows you need weaponry to make a castle look legitimate. Right. So, a group of enterprising guys got into their 1936 Dodge sedan, see here on the right, drove out to Fort Beauséjour and proceeded to abscond with one of the cannons. They got the 500-pound item along with the wooden cradle into the back seat, but it was too long to close the doors, which opened backwards, as you can see in the image on the slide. So the culprits had a nerve-wracking and very cold November evening drive back at between 25 and 30 miles an hour. As the story goes, the class president phoned the police to advise of the mysterious arrival. The police came and decided that they would take it back until they realized how much it weighed. Ultimately, a compromise was reached. The cannon stayed put for the prom, and the university truck returned it to Olac the following Monday. A classic Mount Allison tale was born. More than 80 years ago, Mount Allison graduated its first woman of color. Teruko Komio, known as Terry to her classmates, came to Mount Allison through United Church connections. Following further study at Columbia University in New York, Teruko returned to Japan to teach and have a distinguished career in education. She was awarded an honorary degree in 1954 on the occasion of the 100th anniversary of the education of women at Mount Allison. For many years dating back in the 1950s and 1960s, Winter Carnival was a highlight of the winter semester. The week was filled with events, entertainment, and an annual snow sculpture competition that pitted one residence against another. Some of the designs were quite ingenious, including this version of the Great Wall of China that was constructed by members of the Chinese Student Society. One notorious prank from this time period that the archives have not been able to corroborate yet relates to the car of an unpopular janitor. Supposedly, the men rolled it into place and covered it with snow to cut down on the amount that was required for their particular sculpture. The unsuspecting custodian thought that his car was stolen, but later discovered that it was just part of a snow sculpture when the temperatures started to rise later in the winter. As you may have realized already, the name Bennett is used twice for buildings on campus. We have already discussed Bennett House, which is a residence. The other building with that name was originally not part of campus at all. It was opened as an animal pathology lab by the Government of Canada in 1956. The building later included a crime lab that was used by the RCMP until they moved into the post office building in 1963. In 1999, the building was renamed the Bennett Building to honor the Bennett brothers. Today, it is the home of computing services and the help desk. There's a plaque outside of the building and further information inside the door that discusses these two men who gave the ultimate sacrifice for their country. Fidel Castro died in November of 2016. Shortly after his death, the archives received a phone call from CBC Moncton asking about the Mount Allison connection. At first, we were a bit mystified, but after some digging, we discovered that on February 3rd, 1959, 4 truckloads of Mount Allison students carrying long rifles and dressed as rebels of the 26th of July movement stormed the station CKCW in Moncton, seized the switchboard, and arrested 2 television personalities while on air, causing confusion and panic for some Monctonians. The student rebels chanted live on air support for Castro's return to the island and supported the new Cuban government. The same students were involved in overthrowing the model parliament later that same winter. For a generation of students following the Second World War, their president was known as Ross the Boss Flemington. He was a member of the class of 1922 and was the last president to come up through the Mount Allison ranks. Before the war, he served as headmaster of the Male Academy and was also a United Church minister. He served as president from 1945 until 1962 when he moved to Ottawa to become Director of Education in the Federal External Aid Office. Upon retirement from that position, Flemington became New Brunswick's first ombudsman in 1967. In recognition of the esteem in which he was held by Allisonians, the Science Building was renamed in his honor on May 9, 1970. Another common prank before 1966 was to dress up Beethoven in the Old Music Conservatory. This version could only be described as Beethoven meets Raggedy Ann meets Colonel Sanders. Beethoven is still around in the archives and occasionally makes a rare appearance in the Music Conservatory for special anniversaries. Despite being over 100 years old, he is still in great condition. The designer of the Canadian flag, George Stanley, started teaching at Mount Allison in 1936. He left shortly thereafter for wartime service, but returned to Mount Allison as the head of the new Centre for Canadian Studies in 1969. It was the first program of its kind in the country. Fun fact, there is a bronze statue of George Stanley outside of the post office in town. It was created by multidisciplinary artist Chris Todd of Halifax, Nova Scotia. It was proposed by the town of Sackville to commemorate the 150th anniversary of the establishment of Canada in 2017. This means that you can have a seat and take a selfie with George Stanley. Stanley appears to be very cautious and lately has been sporting a mask in response to the pandemic. Another noted Allisonian is Ella Smith of St. John, New Brunswick. She was the first Canadian woman to earn an MA from Oxford University after women were admitted in 1921. Following graduation, she became an instructor at various schools in England and the United States between 1926 and 1928. For a decade after that, she carried out political research travel, visiting Central Europe, Soviet Russia, and Spain to experience the upheaval and living conditions in those countries. On her return to Canada, she became an outspoken critic of the Stalinist regime and delivered a series of candid public lectures on her experiences and her assessment of the political and social orders of the day. From 1940 to 1951, Smith served as a lecturer in the Department of History at Mount Allison University and subsequently ran a campus bookstore from 1951 to 1960. In 1963, she received an honorary degree from Mount Allison. Mount Allison's first Acadian graduate was Aurore Bourque, who came from a merchant family in present-day Dieppe near Moncton. In the late 1920s and early 1930s, Acadian women who wanted to pursue further education had to travel to Quebec. Aurore chose a different route and studied French at Mount Allison, ultimately earning a BA in 1932. Following graduation, she obtained a teaching post at Moncton High School, where she was known to be a firm but fair teacher. Fun fact, Canada's second female ambassador was a member of the class of 1945. Pamela Ann McDougall was a native of Ottawa, Ontario. She came to Mount Allison to study science and applied for a position with external affairs back in her hometown. There, she continued to rise up through the ranks of the civil service and ultimately was awarded the ambassadorship to Poland in 1968, becoming only the second Canadian woman to achieve this at the time. Upon her return to Canada in 1971, she served with the Privy Council and ultimately became a deputy minister in the Department of National Health and Welfare. She ended her career chairing the Royal Commission on the Conditions of Foreign Service and retired in 1981. She received an honorary degree from Mount Allison in 1977. In 1941, then English professor and a future university president, Albert Trueman, made a wager with one of his classes. He wanted to raise the median grade, and his class took up the challenge. Unfortunately, he came out on the losing end and as a result was required to roll a peanut from one end of the gymnasium to the other with his nose. As you can imagine, the class took great pride in their collective achievement. It's a rather funny picture for a man who served as president of the University of Manitoba and the University of New Brunswick, was chair of the National Film Board, and first director of the Canada Council for the Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences. Ross Barclay was originally from Wentworth, Nova Scotia. He came to Mount Allison and earned a Bachelor of Science in 1950 and a Master of Science in 1951. That same year, he was appointed as professor and subsequently earned his PhD from McMaster University in 1957. He has published over 100 scientific publications, and he regularly worked in the labs at Mount Allison until about 2015. He served as a member of faculty for 43 years, and upon his retirement in 1994, the chemistry building was renamed the Barclay Building in his honor. To date, Mount Allison has not had its first Nobel Prize winner, but we did have one teach here over 100 years ago. James B. Sumner was an instructor in the chemistry department for one semester in 1911. Among the women who entered Mount Allison in the autumn of 1911 was a certain bright-eyed native of Newfoundland. Elsie Tate was a brilliant musician who interrupted her studies at Mount Allison to take further musical training in Berlin. Tate did return to continue her studies with James Noel Brunton, who was then director of the Music Conservatory at Mount Allison. Brunton was instrumental in creating the course of study that would lead to the Bachelor of Music degree. Elsie Tate earned the first Bachelor of Music in 1917, and following graduation, she returned to her native St. John's, Newfoundland, and served as organist and choir director at her home church. Felix Orville Goodman, or Ori as he was known to his classmates, came to Mount Allison from Brooklyn, New York in the late 1940s, and became the first Black student to earn a Bachelor of Fine Arts in 1951. He was part of a small group of African American men who came to Sackville because it was part of the British Empire. The mothers of the men were predominantly from islands in what was then the British West Indies and felt a certain affinity to Canada. These brave young men got on a train in New York City and traveled to Canada to attend Mount Allison in a period when acceptance was something that was in short supply in this part of the world. For example, they could not get their hair cut in Sackville, so had to travel to a black barber in Amherst, which had a small community of its own at the time. Nevertheless, Ori made new friends through his involvements in the Music Conservatory and thrived in the art gallery, where he earned his Bachelor of Fine Arts in 1951. He subsequently used these skills to become an art and music therapist back in his native New York, working in a variety of institutions until his retirement. Thank you for listening, and we hope that you learned some interesting things about your new home. We welcome questions and comments, so please feel free to get in touch. You can contact us at archives@mta.ca. We're always looking for new things, so if you wanted to write an account of your isolation experience, we would be happy to acquire your story so that it can become part of the Mount Allison story. Thanks again, and welcome to this vibrant and unique community.